question period, période de questions. Senator Housakos.
My question is for the government leader in the Senate. The parliamentary budget officer has stated that he has received little concrete information regarding the military spending increase announced on June 9 and is therefore unable to confirm whether Canada will actually meet the NATO target of 2% by 2026. And yet the Prime Minister has fully endorsed the new 5% of GDP benchmark discussed at the NATO summit, already pointing to existing expenditures that Canada could count on towards that percentage. How can the Liberal government commit to such an ambitious target, estimated at $150 billion per year, when it cannot even provide the PBO with credible evidence that it will meet the 2% that it already has promised?
Good question.
Senator Gold.
Thank you for the question. The Prime Minister has been very clear that faced with the changing circumstances that Canada faces, it is necessary to make up for decades of underinvestment in our military, to increase our commitment to our own sovereignty and the defense thereof. And in that regard, the Prime Minister joined other NATO allies in setting a target and a commitment to reach 5% over, I believe, the next 10 years. It's important to recall, colleagues, that a part of that amount, that percentage, that is 1.5%, will be dedicated to investments in critical defense and security-related matters, whether that's new airports, ports, telecommunication networks, and the government is committed to reaching those goals.
Senator Housakos.
So, Senator Gold, does this mean that the Liberal government still has no clear plan to spend the $9 billion that it has announced? And the reason why we're in this mess in the first place is that governments have been fiddling around with the numbers in order to meet targets, but not actually doing things. And can you confirm unequivocally that Canada will in fact meet the NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on defense by April 2026, even as the Prime Minister has just accepted this new 5% benchmark?
Senator Gold.
The government has been clear that it intends to reach that 2% target, and I don't need to add anything more to what the Prime Minister has already said. The regrettable fact is that there are many reasons for which we have fallen behind our own needs, and this government is committed to addressing those, which includes, amongst other things, the fact that year over year the Defense Department does not indeed even spend all the money that's allocated in the budgetary process.
Senator Batters.
Senator Gold, the cybersecurity bill in the last Parliament, Bill C-26, was 8 years in the making. The government forced the Senate to pass the bill in 3 months, only discovering at the final stages that their own massive drafting mistake required a last-minute amendment. The Liberal government then decided to prorogue and then called an election, so it died on the order paper. Now this Liberal government is trying to resurrect essentially the same highly flawed bill. In a recent media article, a legal expert described Bill C-8 as a, quote, almost verbatim copy of Bill C-26, saying, quote, it's the same bill back from the dead. This Liberal government pledged to do politics differently, yet they are the same old Trudeau-era cabinet ministers pushing the same old flawed Trudeau legislation. So how can you call this Canada's new government when it's just the same old, same old?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question, and you won't be surprised if I don't agree with some of the premises underlying the question. This is an important bill. The Senate did its job as it was asked to do in the last Parliament. The government is reintroducing this important bill, and I look forward to this Chamber's study of that bill when it does arrive, if and when it does arrive from the House.
Senator Batters.
That's right. The Senate committees do study legislation for weeks, hearing expert witnesses suggest improvements, and yet this Liberal government then still regurgitates the same old legislation. Prorogation and dissolution were the deliberate choices of this Liberal government. You had 6 additional months to actually fix this bill. The new bill does not even include an amendment that the Privacy Commissioner of Canada testified is required. It seems CEO Carney prefers a rubber stamp. Either this government values the work of the Senate or it does not. Which is it?
Senator Gold.
This government is determined to provide Canada with the legislation that it needs to address the issues of the day, including the growing and broadening range of issues that cybersecurity addresses. And once again, Parliament will do its job to review the bill. The Senate will do its job, and if improvements are needed, I have every confidence the Senate will propose them.
Senator Coyle.
Senator Gould, the Library of Parliament recently produced a report for me on advancing a climate lens in Parliament. The report pointed to the 2024 Cabinet Directive on Strategic Environmental and Economic Assessment, which modernizes environmental and economic analysis in the development of policies, programs, and regulations intended for Cabinet. The research found that that regime advances climate mainstreaming and normalizing across the government. As the government moves forward with its promise to strengthen Canada's economy and prioritize nation-building projects, we know that one key consideration is whether a project contributes to clean growth and to meeting Canada's objectives with respect to climate change. Senator Gould, will the government continue to use the 2024 Strategic Environmental and Economic Assessment regime when making key cabinet decisions?
Senator Gould.
Thank you for your question. I can assure this chamber that as the government builds and works to help us all build together a strong economy for the future, it will never lose sight of the importance and the choices that its decisions will make on our future generations, and will remain mindful of the long-term sustainability and the kind of economy and environment we want for those generations. The government will continue to make investments and decisions that will drive emissions down, drive new economic growth across this country, and of course, open new export markets with like-minded countries.
Senator Coyle.
I hope it will continue to use that valuable assessment regime. Senator Gould, the Library of Parliament report also found that Parliament lacks a comparable framework by which to scrutinize legislation. Would the government consider introducing legislation similar to the Canadian Gender Budgeting Act to mandate a climate decision-making process for the Government of Canada and in Parliament?
Senator Gould.
Well, thank you for your question, Senator. I can't speculate on what future legislation this government may introduce, but I can again repeat and reassure this chamber that the government will remain focused on the sustainability of the economic growth we all hope to achieve.
Senator Lafreda.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gold, Bill C-2, the Strong Borders Act, was introduced last month. It includes proposed amendments to the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, aimed at strengthening Canada's legal framework through enhanced penalties and improved supervisory collaboration. We recently learned that between 2020 and 2024, approximately 2.6 million suspicious financial transactions were reported to FINTRAC. In 2021, the government committed to establishing the first-ever national agency dedicated exclusively to investigating complex financial crimes and enforcing federal laws in this area. Can you confirm whether the current government still intends to create this agency? If so, when and where can we expect to see the corresponding funding requirements reflected in the estimates?
Senator Gould.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I cannot speculate on any further any future funding announcements, but I can say that this government remains committed to cracking down on money laundering and to stop the cash flow accruing to organized crime, so that organized crime can be deprived of those illegal profits. And that's why, amongst other reasons, the government introduced provisions in Bill C-2 to ensure that law enforcement has the tools that they require to do that job.
Senator Lafreda.
Thank you. World leaders were in Canada recently for the G7 summit to address several issues, including international peace and security and global economic stability. Was Canada successful in using its G7 presidency to highlight the threats from illicit finance and propose the development of a call to action to address criminal activity that impacts the financial sector and national security?
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question. I've been advised that as part of the G7's finance ministers and central bank governors communique, there was a commitment to remain steadfast in tackling financial crime, including money laundering, financing of terrorism, and the financing of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The government will continue this important work.
Senator Deakin, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Your Honor. Senator Gold, a recent CBC article shared a story of a widow whose late husband's pension was mistakenly deposited into another person's account. Her bank, CIBC, initially claimed that it could only recover $3,200. It was not until the matter was investigated by CBC that the bank issued a full repayment. But the bank still insisted that it had followed standard procedures. This case highlights that Canada's largest banks are still not doing enough to protect customers from payment errors and fraud. Meanwhile, Canadians continue to pay some of the highest bank fees in the world. Senator Gold, I asked you this in the last Parliament, and I'll ask it again now. When will banks be held to higher standards of accountability in protecting Canadians from fraud? Currently, they have no incentive to invest in fraud protection at a level that matches the growing risks. Will the Finance Minister commit to following the leadership of other jurisdictions, like the United Kingdom, where the banks, rather than the consumers, are responsible for bank fraud?
Senator Gold. Merci, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Gold. Senator Gold. Thank you, Senator Deakin.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Senator, and for underlining the risks to Canadians and customers of acts of fraud and the damage that can accrue to them. I certainly will take your both concerns and suggestions to the attention of the Minister, and my office certainly will at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
Senator Deakin, Nova Scotia.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Gold. Canada has yet to implement either real-time rail or the next phase of consumer-driven banking. These two reforms could help modernize payment systems and reduce fraud. The last fall economic statement promised to launch a consumer-driven banking framework by early 2026 to fund the FCAC over 3 years. Yet the funding is absent in the 2025 main and supplementary estimates. This may cause another delay. Can you give us an update on where things are at with open banking or consumer-directed fraud?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you. I don't have a timeline to share with you, but the government agrees with you that every Canadian deserves access to affordable and modern banking services. And again, I will remind the Minister of your ongoing concerning and advocacy on this matter.
Senator Henkel.
Senator Henkel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Gold, women's health remains largely neglected in our public policies. From 2009 to 2020, only 5.7% of grants from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research were devoted to women's health, often focusing on cancer. Issues such as endometriosis and mental health receive a mere 3.8%. As a result, women are diagnosed on average 2 years later than men for over 1,300 common conditions. Endometriosis, on the other hand, takes over 5 years to be identified. Also, women spend 25% more of their lives in poor health, and in 8 provinces and territories, gynecological surgery is reimbursed 28% less than comparable male procedures. I'm available to provide you with access to the data that I've just provided. Is the government ready? Thank you, Senator Henkel, but I'm now going to ask Senator Gold if he has a response to your question. Thank you for having raised the difficulties that face women and the gaps that are there. I'm not surprised to hear it, but it is disappointing. If I can read between the lines, the government will tackle this problem with seriousness and in collaboration with provinces and territories who
have a constitutional responsibility for these issues, but there is a role to play for the Canadian government, and the government will do so, given the importance of the issue. Senator Enke, in this future strategy, will the government commit to correcting funding discrepancies, requiring the systematic disaggregation of data by sex in research, and including women fairly in clinical trials, so the treatments are finally designed for them and not simply adapted after the fact? Senator Gold, thank you for the question and for emphasizing the importance of disaggregation of data. We have already taken some steps here, thanks to several interventions by senators. The work must be done, must continue, and it will.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for Senator Gold, Leader of the Government in the Senate. Senator Jonathan Moore, an Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer at the Department of National Defence, stated that 60% of the Canadian Coast Guard budget is already included in the military spending Canada reports to NATO. Can you tell us, since when has this been the case, and on what basis a civilian, unarmed organization can be counted on to such an extent in our defence expenditures?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question. The Canadian Coast Guard plays a very important role in Canada and for Canadians, analogous to roles that similar organizations play in other parts of the world. Every country is different, has different structures and different ways of which it is organized. But as we look to the future, and especially to the future of in our north, our vast borders in northern Canada, the Coast Guard will play an ever-increasing role in protecting Canadians from risk, affirming our sovereignty, and playing its part along with other players in the Canadian government family to protect and defend Canadians.
Senator Wells.
Thank you, Speaker. Senator Gold. If 60% of the Coast Guard's budget is already being counted, and according to Mr. Moore, only an additional portion could be added, then why did the Prime Minister present the integration of the Coast Guard as a decisive step towards reaching the 2% NATO defence spending target? Was this simply political theatre, an accounting exercise, or actual action with an asset that's not equipped for such a role?
Senator Gold.
Well, respectfully, Senator, and thank you for your question, I'm not sure that any of the answers you offered me are quite necessarily correct or capture the intent of this government. This government recognizes that in too many ways our military infrastructure, whether physical or human resources, needs to change and improve to be up to the task. And this is one area where work will need to be done and will be done in that area.
Senator Martin.
Leader, how do you explain such a contradiction between, on one hand, the Prime Minister speaking of a strategic integration of the Coast Guard into our military capabilities, and on the other, the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff, supported by other senior officials, stating that there are absolutely no plans to integrate it into the armed forces? It seems the Prime Minister's office and the Department of National Defence can't even agree on this fundamental point. What is the truth, Leader?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question and for allowing me to elaborate further on your colleague's earlier question. This government is moving quickly to address the challenges that Canada is facing. This government has made very, very clear announcements that, frankly, have deviated from the way in which previous governments over many decades have operated, certainly with regard to defense. And the Prime Minister and his and cabinet members, working with the others in our military and in the Coast Guard, will work together to best chart a path whereby the Coast Guard, the military, and other important institutions in our nation can work together to strengthen our defense and protect our sovereignty.
Senator Martin.
Well, amid this confusion, with the Prime Minister promising a Coast Guard under defense to reach the 2% target, while Lieutenant General Kelsey insisting it will remain civilian and unarmed, Canadians have a right to know what exactly is the additional Coast Guard budget the government intends to submit to NATO.
Senator Gold.
The government, the Prime Minister has just finished his meetings in NATO. Work will need to be done, and properly so, even at the expedited pace we're expecting and witnessing in this government. And I have every expectation that the budget figures will be presented in due course.
Senator Petitclerc.
Senator Petitclerc. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Gold, this may be the last question I have to ask you in this role. So first of all, thank you for everything. I'm going to miss you. My possibly last question to you then is this. On June 17th, the Chief Accessibility Officer, Stéphanie Cadieux, published her second report on employment accessibility in Canada. In that report states that even today, far too many qualified people with disabilities who want to work and who are perfectly well qualified are still unable to find full-time jobs and earn more than $80,000. Today's Senate is more diverse than ever, and we can be proud of that. That said, 1 Canadian in 4 lives with one or more disabilities, and that reality is far from being reflected here in this chamber. Do you agree with me, Senator, that the government should do more to ensure that these voices are better represented in future Senate appointments? Senator Gold. Thank you for the question. I'm going to miss you too, dear colleague. You were here when I got here 8.5 years ago. And you've been an extraordinary colleague. Listen, I couldn't presume either the process nor the decisions made by the Prime Minister when it comes to Senate appointments. But I do share your perspective. That we must continue to make progress so that this chamber and our public places are inclusive in every sense and every aspect. So thank you for the question. Senator Petitclerc. No, thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Clément.
Senator Gold, also my last interaction with you during QP. I'm grateful to you for your career and your service. June 20th was World Refugee Day. At the height of the crisis at Roxham Road, when asylum claimants were crossing the border in unprecedented numbers, I visited the Dev Center in my home city of Cornwall. Asylum seekers from around the world were staying there, including a man named Firas from Turkey. Firas is among the many Syrian refugees in Canada who hasn't been able to go home in years. Firas hasn't seen his mom in 10 years. He's feeling hopeful right now because France is now allowing Syrian refugees to return home temporarily without losing their refugee status. Shouldn't Canada consider a similar approach now that the Assad regime has fallen?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question. Canada very much welcomes the end of Syria's Assad regime that inflicted decades of suffering on its own people, and on the families who lost hundreds of thousands of their members to his violence. I can't speculate on any changes to the Canadian refugee program. Canada, but I can reaffirm Canada's, on behalf of the government, its commitment to the Syrian people, and urge all for a lasting peace in the area. And I will certainly bring your suggestion forward to the attention of the minister.
Senatrice Clément.
Thank you, Senator Gold. I understand that the IRCC is slowly chipping away at the backlog of applications in its system. However, we know that people are being impacted by these delays, and part of that impact, of course, is being disconnected from family for years. Senator Gold, what more can be done to ensure that the IRCC meets its service standards and delivers answers to applicants in a timely manner?
Senator Gold.
Thank you. Look, this government has made a commitment, many commitments, and one of which is to improve the way in which government delivers its services. The new head of the civil service is a testament to that commitment. So the government remains committed to improve both the efficiency of the system while maintaining its integrity.
Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the government representative. June 23rd this year marked the 40th anniversary of the killing of 268 Canadians and 68 citizens of other countries in the bombing of a passenger plane off the coast of Ireland. On Monday, it was an honor for me to be at the ceremony marking this occasion. Law enforcement investigations were badly handled, and despite various reviews, the truth has never been fully uncovered, and the perpetrators were not held to account. The families of the victims are concerned that this tragedy is being papered over, even though we know that the bombs that exploded on the Air India plane and at Narita Airport were made by Canadians on Canadian soil. The families request that the Museum of History organize a permanent display of this Canadian tragedy. I'm asking you to convey this request to the President of the Museum and the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Canadian Identity and Culture to ensure that the lives of these Canadian victims will be honored appropriately.
Senator Gold.
I certainly will, Senator, and the one thing that I can say is that this attack was the most deadly attack in our country's history, and the victims will never be forgotten. And I certainly will bring this to the attention of all the minister and others that you requested.
Senator Cardozo.
Thank you for your sensitivity to this issue, and this might be my last supplementary question, so thank you for your service to us. This week, the RCMP revealed that they know the identity of a third person involved in this disgraceful crime and have called him Mr. X, even though he has deceased. I'm asking that the identity of this person be revealed. It is surely the right of the Canadian families to know all there is to know about this Canadian tragedy. Could you ask the Minister of Public Security to ensure that this name is publicly revealed as soon as possible?
Senator Gold.
Well, I'll certainly raise your concern with the minister, and the minister will make the appropriate decision.
Senator Husakos.
Senator Gold, a few months ago, with great fanfare, the government announced the listing of Samadoun as a terrorist organization, which, of course, we all complimented, applauded, and thought was the appropriate thing to do. But yet, months later, what's the point of naming Samadoun as a terrorist organization if they continue to operate in the streets of Canada, continue to operate and recruit and travel back and forth? And, of course, most egregiously, they also still have a status of a non-profit organization by the Canadian government. How are these two things congruent, one with the other? On the one hand, listed as a terrorist organization. On the other, the government refusing to pull away from them the non-for-profit status which they enjoy.
Senator Gold.
Senator, thank you for your question. You know, the decision to list the organization as a terrorist organization was a long time coming, and was the right decision. And that was within the direct prerogative of the government, taking advice, as we've discussed many times in this chamber, from security forces and others. The decision to grant or withhold or withdraw charitable status for an organization is, if I understand correctly, primarily in the hands of the CRA, and it has not been the practice or policy of this or previous governments, to my understanding, of directing them what to do. So the incongruity that you underline may very well be a function of the different decision-making authorities over these two matters. It's certainly a matter that I will reflect upon and bring to the attention of the government.
Senator Husakos.
We were also enthused by the fact that it took a long time, but finally the IRGC, along with Samadoun, were listed as terrorist organizations. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, government leader, that it's not incumbent on government to direct the CRA, but it is incumbent on government to make sure that all agencies across all levels of government respect the wishes of the Canadian government when we list terrorist organizations, and we need to find, will you agree with me, and that's my question, government leader, do we need the political will here to make sure that when we list terrorist organizations, that all agencies go after those terrorists?
Senator Gold.
Senator, I can't agree with the way that you formulate. I understand the sentiment behind it, but I do think you would agree with me that it is important for governments of whatever political orientation to respect the divisions of labor, to say nothing of separation of powers between the government and agencies that have an independent status.
The time for question period has now expired.
Orders of day, ordre du jour. Senator LaBoucane Benson.
Honourable Senators, pursuant to Rule 4-12(3), I'd like to inform the Senate that as we proceed with government business, the Senate will address the items in the following order. Second reading of Bill C-5, second reading of Bill C-6, second reading of Bill C-7, followed by the remaining items in the order that they appear on the order paper.
Government business, affaires du gouvernement. Bill, second reading, projet de loi, deuxième lecture, pursuant to the order, second reading of Bill C-5.
Senator Youssef.
Thank you, Speaker. Honourable Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time.
L'honorable Senator Youssef propose, appuyé par l'honorable.
The Honourable Senator Youssef moves, seconded by the Honourable Senator, that this bill be read a second time.
Youssef.
Honourable Senators, I rise today to speak on Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy. When I was asked to sponsor this bill, I did not have any hesitation. Did I know it's going to be tough? Of course. Did I expect we will find ways to talk to one another? Of course, but nation building has never been easy. A nation building is fundamentally what this bill is about, at a time when our country is under serious threat. I believe all senators in this chamber know we find ourselves in a more uncertain and dangerous world. We realize that the relationship we had with the United States based on economic integration, military and security cooperation is over. The trade relationship we had with our closest neighbor, ally, and friend, the one that has delivered prosperity for Canadians for so long, has fundamentally changed. Colleagues, the unjustified tariffs placed on us by the United States, make no mistakes, are a serious threat to our economy, our sovereignty, and the Canadian way of life. While we cannot control the action of the President of the United States, we can control how we at home respond. I believe we must take urgent action now to strengthen our negotiating hand, protect Canadian workers and our economy. This legislation is a direct response to the moment we find ourselves in and seeks to do two things. The first part of the bill aims to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers that have been in existence as long as we have been a country. The illegal and unjustified trade actions initiated by the United States highlight the urgent need to address those barriers that have fragmented our economy and constrain our opportunities for Canadians. The second part of the bill is about recognizing that for our economy to remain resilient and to not only weather the storm with the current tariff, but also to better prepare us for the even increasing threats we will face in the future. We need to build things that are in the national interest and do it faster. These major national building initiatives are essential to unlocking our full economic potential, strengthening Canada both at home and on the global stage. Today I want to talk about what these two parts and how the bill have been strengthened by the amendments that were passed last week in the other place. Senators, I want to start with part one of this bill, that it seeks to help accomplish what we as a nation have been struggling to achieve since we came together almost 160 years ago, to create the Great Confederation, to have one economy serving the national interests. And that is what's at the heart of this bill, serving the national interests. If we are to safeguard Canada's economic sovereignty, we must start by strengthening our own internal trade ties. We cannot afford to be a patchwork of close provincial territorial economies when the pressures from abroad demand unity, resilience, and self-reliance at home. While we have long championed open markets abroad, we have quietly tolerated closed doors at home. We have created a country where it's often easier for a company to sell to Germany than ship across provincial borders. This is not only absurd, it is self-defeating. Today, Canada's internal trade barriers is equivalent to placing a 7% tariff on our own goods in our own country. We need to eliminate these barriers, build a stronger one Canadian economy instead of 13. The barriers this bill seeks to remove are those that exist between the federal jurisdiction, provincial, and territorial jurisdiction to promote freer trade of goods and service and labor mobility. The bill will allow for federal regulatory agencies or department to ensure that where there is a provincial territorial legislation that is comparable and compatible is the key, it will receive the same accreditation as federally. For Canadian businesses, this will make it easier to buy, sell, and transport goods, service across the country. To enhance labor mobility, the acts provide a framework to recognize provincial and territorial licenses and certification for workers. This means that a worker authorized in provincial or territorial jurisdiction can move quickly and easily to work in the same occupation in the federal jurisdiction. This will make it easier to do business across Canada by removing regulatory duplication and cutting federal red tape. This also reduces the costs and delays for Canadian businesses to follow comparable provincial and territorial rules. We have heard from Labour over the course of the bill study that these duplications and red tape are barriers for working in the federal regulatory field, are not necessary, and are a detriment to workers. While this act is a good first step, the federal government will continue to encourage the provinces and territories to align their own licensing and certification requirements for skilled workers alike, doctors, nurses, teachers, and more to further improve labor mobility in Canada. The federal government wants this bill to be a symbolic of the need by all of us to recognize we must act now more than ever with common purpose and shared goal. Now, there are the concern that we have raised about wanting standards to be lowered because of this bill. I spent a lifetime representing workers in my life's work, and I understand the importance of fighting for higher standards, in particular, those related to health and safety on the work site. Now, across this confederation, we all know that some standards are better than others. I believe there is recognition that we need to incentivize the move towards higher standards, not lower ones. This bill recognizes the importance of this issue because it includes safeguards to protect the health and safety of workers and Canadians. Firstly, the Act applies to federal requirements on the interprovincial trade of goods and services when they are comparable provincial or territorial requirements. Secondly, the Acts allow government to provide exceptions for the recognition of comparative provincial and territorial standards when the risk to health and safety of Canadians or the environment are deemed to be too high. To a large extent, the premiers have recently been working towards this goal for several years. However, given the crisis with the United States, the fundamental change that appears to be now happening in our trading relationship, premiers and this government recognize the removal of these interprovincial barriers can no longer be delayed. PEI